Have you ever wondered what the very first spark of faith looked like, long before temples, gods, or even words? Picture a world 300,000 years ago when early humans stared into the dark wilderness, surrounded by sounds they couldn't explain. The crackle of fire was still new, the growl of a hidden predator could strike terror, and the stars above seemed like eyes watching from another realm. In this fragile balance between fear and wonder, something extraordinary was born, the very roots of belief. For the Homo erectus, survival was an everyday miracle. The rising sun after a freezing night, the rain that revived a dying forest, or the sudden calm after a storm. These weren't just natural events. They were signs, patterns, perhaps even messages from forces unseen. Fear gave them caution, but hope gave them imagination. Between those two emotions, the human mind began to weave meaning into the unknown. Fire wasn't only a tool, it was a guardian spirit, a companion in the endless night. Imagine a group of early humans gathered around that fire. One of them points at the sky, at a flash of lightning cutting through the dark. A child asks what it means, and an elder, searching for an answer, gives birth to the first myth, a story that makes sense of chaos. From that moment, storytelling became the bridge between reality and the invisible. Every tale passed down wasn't just a lesson of survival. It was a step toward faith. But faith wasn't yet organized or named. It was raw and instinctive, rooted in awe and fear. To these ancient minds, death wasn't the end. It was a mystery. When a member of the group didn't wake up, they didn't just vanish. They transformed, perhaps joining the wind or the stars. The living felt their presence and, maybe for the first time, placed objects beside the body. A stone tool, a flower, a gesture of belief that existence continued beyond the body. That small act was the dawn of spirituality. The first faiths weren't about worshipping gods, but about surviving uncertainty. In every rustle of leaves, in every flicker of firelight, early humans searched for reassurance that they weren't alone. And in that search, they found connection to nature, to one another, and to something greater they couldn't yet name. What do you think? Was the first belief born out of fear or out of hope? Tell me in the comments, and don't forget to like this video and subscribe for more journeys into humanity's most mysterious origins, night. For early humans, it was not simply the absence of light. It was a living presence, filled with movement, voices, and unseen eyes. When the sun vanished, the world turned strange and threatening. Shapes shifted in the darkness. The air itself seemed alive with danger. And yet within that blackness, something miraculous flickered. Fire. The moment humans learned to control it, the entire balance of existence changed. Fire was more than warmth or light. It was a symbol of mastery over the unknown. Around the flames, they could see one another's faces, feel safety, share food, and tell stories. The fire became the center of their world, a line between life and death, between the seen and the unseen. Beyond its circle, the darkness waited, deep, cold, and filled with mystery. Within its glow, humans began to imagine that maybe the world wasn't ruled only by beasts and storms, but by invisible forces that could be both dangerous and kind. Each night, the fire spoke. Its crackling, unpredictable voice sounded alive, as if it were breathing, whispering secrets. The flames danced like spirits, their movement hypnotic. To the human mind, shaped by curiosity and fear, it was impossible not to see meaning in that movement. Perhaps the fire had its own will, its own personality. Maybe it could listen, maybe it could protect. Thus, reverence was born, a primitive form of respect for something both familiar and powerful. The connection between light and safety ran deep. The fire chased away predators, but it also gave them something else, time. Time to think, to dream, to remember. Around it, imagination blossomed. Shadows cast on the rocks became figures. Sparks rising to the sky became stars being born. And for the first time, humanity looked at light not only as survival, but as something sacred. But the fire also revealed another truth, that light could not exist without darkness. Every ember that glowed would one day fade. Every flame, no matter how strong, would die. Watching it burn down must have been a powerful lesson. Even the strongest light needs constant care. Perhaps in those moments, as the fire dimmed and the night closed in, they began to sense something deeper, that keeping faith was like keeping fire alive. Both demanded attention, belief, and a reason to continue. The night taught humans fear. Fire taught them hope. Together, they shaped the rhythm of belief, a pattern that still burns within us today. Death. For early humans, it was the greatest mystery, the one experience no one could explain, only witness. One day a companion was breathing, laughing, hunting, and the next they were still, silent, gone. What happened to the spark that once filled the body with life? Where did it go? For minds already shaped by curiosity and awe, that question must have burned as deeply as the fire that warmed their nights. At first, death may have seemed like nature reclaiming what was hers, but soon a pattern appeared. The idea that perhaps the person didn't truly vanish. When they buried their dead, they didn't do it carelessly. They placed the body carefully, often curling it into a fetal position, as if preparing for a new beginning. Around it, they left tools, food, or flowers, offerings for a journey beyond sight. That single gesture carried an enormous meaning, the belief that life continued somewhere else. This moment, quiet and intimate, marked the dawn of spiritual thought. To look at death and imagine something beyond it required a leap of imagination and of faith. Maybe the wind that touched their faces carried the breath of those who had gone. Maybe the flicker of a fire was the spirit of someone returning for a moment. In those simple, symbolic acts, humanity began to separate the physical from the spiritual, the visible from the invisible. Grief may have been the first teacher of belief. The pain of losing someone forced them to find meaning in absence. If the dead were truly gone forever, then the world would be unbearable. But if they lived on, even as a shadow, a voice, or a memory, then life had purpose, and death had peace. This fragile hope created the foundation of what we now call the soul. Imagine a group standing by a shallow grave, silent except for the wind. They watch the soil fall, each sound heavy with emotion. One of them closes their eyes, perhaps whispers a few sounds, not yet words, a farewell, a promise, or maybe a prayer. That single, unspoken ritual is one of humanity's most ancient acts of faith. And so, in the face of death, early humans discovered something sacred, the need to believe that existence does not end. The mystery of what happens after we die has guided every civilization since, but it began here with those who first dared to hope that the end might be just another beginning. Hope, that small, invisible force that pushed humanity forward when everything else seemed impossible. Imagine living in a world where every day could be your last. Storms arrived without warning, herds vanished overnight, droughts turned rivers into dust. For early humans, nature was both a provider and a destroyer, unpredictable and alive. And yet, they didn't surrender to despair. Instead, they began to imagine ways to influence what they couldn't control. From that fragile spark of imagination, magical thinking was born. At first, it wasn't religion, it was survival. When the hunt succeeded after a certain gesture or sound, they remembered it and repeated it the next time. When rain followed a chant or a movement, they believed the act had power. Slowly, patterns turned into rituals, and rituals into belief. A stone placed just right, a mark drawn on the ground, a whispered sound to the sky. These became bridges between the human and the unknown. It wasn't foolishness, it was hope transformed into action. Every gesture was a plea for balance, for continuity, for safety in a world that offered none. If nature was ruled by unseen forces, then maybe those forces could be persuaded, thanked, or calmed. And so the human mind began to imagine relationships with things beyond sight, the wind, the water, the earth itself. This way of thinking did more than comfort them. It united them. Rituals gave the group shared purpose. Every person played a role. One made the offering, another sang, another waited for a sign. These collective moments were not only about survival, they built trust, identity, and belonging. Through shared hope, they found strength. But magical thinking also revealed something profound: humanity's refusal to accept chaos. To believe that one could change fate, even in the smallest way, was an act of courage. It was the seed of all faiths, of all dreams, the conviction that intention could touch the infinite. Close your eyes and imagine them now, standing in the rain, faces lifted, voices echoing through the night. They didn't know if the skies listened, but they believed it. Mattered to try. That belief alone changed everything. What do you think? Was this magical thinking the first form of human creativity, or the first illusion that gave meaning to life? Share your thoughts in the comments. I'd love to know your perspective on how hope first shaped humanity's mind. Communities of early humans were fragile yet resilient. Survival depended on cooperation, trust, and shared knowledge. But it was not enough to simply live together. Humans needed stories, narratives, that gave shape to their experiences and bound them to one another. Around the fire, tales of hunts, storms, and spirits were shared, repeated, and remembered. These stories were more than entertainment. They were tools of cohesion, the first threads of a social fabric strengthened by belief. When a successful hunt occurred, it wasn't just the meat that mattered. It was the story of how it happened. Who observed the tracks first? Who struck the prey? Who helped carry it home? Each tale became a map of human action, a guide for behavior, and a moral code encoded in memory. But these stories also contained the unseen, the forces that might have intervened, the spirits that might have guided their hand. In blending observable events with invisible forces, humans created myths, early attempts to explain, predict, and control the chaos of life. These narratives served another purpose: teaching and remembering. Without writing, every lesson had to be passed from one generation to the next, verbally. A child learning to avoid a dangerous river, to respect a forest, or to recognize a predator was also learning about unseen powers that shaped the world. Knowledge and belief merged, forming a dual layer of understanding, practical and spiritual. Belief also reinforced social bonds. When the group shared rituals, a dance, a chant, a marking on a stone, they were performing their stories together. Participation mattered. Every individual contributed to the collective memory. This shared imagination created identity, loyalty, and trust. In essence, myth became the glue of society. Through these early stories, humans discovered the power of narrative, the ability to unite, to instruct, and to inspire. They learned that even the unknown could be framed, that chaos could be tamed with imagination, and that their lives were part of something greater. The stories were living proof that humans were not merely surviving, but creating meaning. And so, every myth, every ritual, every tale told by the flickering fire laid the groundwork for civilization itself. The ability to weave the seen and unseen together gave humans the capacity to believe, to hope, and to endure. Symbols, marks on stone, patterns on cave walls, these were the first attempts to communicate not just with other humans, but with the invisible forces they sensed all around them. Imagine an early human tracing the outline of a hand on a rock, or painting the silhouette of a bison in ochre. These were not mere decorations. Each mark carried meaning, a bridge between the tangible world and the unseen. Art emerged from necessity as much as imagination. In the hunt, the animal on the wall could serve as a guide, a lesson, or even a charm to ensure success. But in every stroke, there was also reverence, awe, and recognition of something beyond comprehension. The caves themselves became sacred spaces, places where humans could step outside the ordinary, where the boundary between reality and spirit blurred. Creating symbols required abstraction, the ability to see beyond the immediate. The first humans didn't just react to the world, they interpreted it. A circle, a hand, an animal. Each symbol encapsulated both observation and intention. In a way, these early markings were prayers, petitions, or expressions of wonder, frozen in pigment and stone. They communicated desires, fears, and knowledge across generations, long before spoken language could fully carry meaning. These symbols also fostered community. To create them, groups gathered, shared techniques, and transmitted shared understandings. Each image told a story of collective experience and belief. Those who came later could interpret the marks, learning lessons about survival, reverence, and connection to the environment. Art was both functional and sacred, practical and mystical. Through symbols, early humans began to externalize thought. They began to see themselves as participants in a larger universe, capable of influencing it through representation. Every stroke of ochre, every carved line was a dialogue between humanity and the world they were trying to understand, a silent conversation with forces they could not name. In these caves and on these stones, we find the earliest evidence of human spirituality, creativity, and the desire to reach beyond the visible. It is the moment when thought became tangible, when belief left the mind and entered the world as something permanent. Imagine the figure who steps forward at a critical moment, neither fully separate from the group nor entirely ordinary. The primitive shaman was that bridge between humans and the unseen world. In a society where danger was constant and the forces of nature unpredictable, someone needed to interpret signs, predict outcomes, and connect the community to what they could not see. The shaman became this vital guide. This role likely emerged slowly. Perhaps an individual noticed patterns others overlooked, the way animals moved, how storms approached, or how certain rituals seemed to influence outcomes. That observation, paired with skill and charisma, distinguished them. They learned to speak, to act, to perform, and to manipulate symbols and fire in ways that gave the group reassurance. Their gestures, chants, and dances were not merely performance. They were tools of survival, transmitting knowledge and hope. The shaman's power came from perception and imagination. By entering altered states, through drumming, trance, or repetitive movement, they explored worlds invisible to the ordinary eye. There they sought guidance from spirits, ancestors, or forces of nature. Whatever they discovered, they returned with messages, instructions, and warnings. The community listened not because they were deceived, but because trust had been earned. In these moments, faith and practicality intertwined. The shaman also served as a healer and mediator. Illness and injury were threats beyond understanding, and the shaman acted as both interpreter and intercessor. Their presence reassured the group that the unseen was being acknowledged, and perhaps even persuaded to act favorably. Through this mediation, humans learned to see themselves as part of a larger system, connected to forces beyond their immediate perception. Yet the shaman's influence was subtle and profound. They shaped stories, rituals, and symbols, the very framework of early belief. By embodying both human and spiritual roles, they taught that survival depended not only on physical strength, but also on wisdom, imagination, and the ability to navigate the invisible. What do you think? Were these first shamans, guides, visionaries, or something else entirely? Share your thoughts in the comments below. I'd love to hear your perspective on the origins of spiritual leadership. Nature itself became the first deity. Long before names or temples, early humans observed the raw power around them. Thunder splitting the sky, rivers swelling with rain, the flight of birds signaling change. These events were more than scenery. They were alive, intentional, and often terrifying. To survive, humans had to respect them, and in that respect, they began to see divinity in the world itself. Every landscape held meaning. A towering mountain was not just a rock, it was a sentinel, watching over the land. A roaring river wasn't simply water in motion, it was a force that could both nourish and destroy. Animals were not only prey. They were powerful beings with spirits, cunning and unpredictable, deserving reverence and caution. Humans began to perceive themselves as part of a universe filled with intention, where each element carried its own story and influence. This perception gave rise to rituals that honored the natural world. The first offerings, a stone placed on a riverbank, a carved figure of a bison, a song to the storm, were attempts to communicate, to establish a relationship, to appease or thank forces beyond comprehension. Each act was both practical and spiritual. It encouraged attentiveness to the environment and acknowledged the mysteries that could not be controlled. By seeing nature as sacred, early humans also cultivated empathy and observation. To hunt successfully, they had to understand animal behavior. To survive floods or fire, they had to read patterns in weather. This practical awareness intertwined seamlessly with belief. What they revered was also what they studied, what they learned to navigate, and what they feared and respected in equal measure. The sacredness of nature also fostered imagination. Storms were not random. They carried messages. The rustling of leaves was more than sound. It could signal spirit presence. Early humans began mapping stories onto the landscape, seeing signs where others saw chaos. These stories connected the community to their environment and to each other, creating shared rituals, symbols, and myths. Through this recognition, humans learned their place in a larger system. They were participants in a living, conscious world where respect and observation ensured survival and belief provided guidance and meaning. Nature, in its majesty and terror, became the first teacher, the first God, and the first mirror in which humans saw both themselves and the universe around them. Nature itself became the first deity. Long before names or temples, early humans observed the raw power around them: thunder splitting the sky, rivers swelling with rain, the flight of birds signaling change. These events were more than scenery. They were alive, intentional, and often terrifying. To survive, humans had to respect them, and in that respect, they began to see divinity in the world itself. Every landscape held meaning. A towering mountain was not just a rock, it was a sentinel watching over the land. A roaring river wasn't simply water in motion, it was a force that could both nourish and destroy. Animals were not only prey, they were powerful beings with spirits, cunning and unpredictable, deserving reverence and caution. Humans began to perceive themselves as part of a universe filled with intention, where each element carried its own story and influence. This perception gave rise to rituals that honored the natural world. The first offerings, a stone placed on a riverbank, a carved figure of a bison, a song to the storm, were attempts to communicate, to establish a relationship, to appease or thank forces beyond comprehension. Each act was both practical and spiritual. It encouraged attentiveness to the environment and acknowledged the mysteries that could not be controlled. By seeing nature as sacred, early humans also cultivated empathy and observation. To hunt successfully, they had to understand animal behavior. To survive floods or fire, they had to read patterns in weather. This practical awareness intertwined seamlessly with belief. What they revered was also what they studied, what they learned to navigate, and what they feared and respected in equal measure. The sacredness of nature also fostered imagination. Storms were not random, they carried messages. The rustling of leaves was more than sound, it could signal spirit presence. Early humans began mapping stories onto the landscape, seeing signs where others saw chaos. These stories connected the community to their environment and to each other, creating shared rituals, symbols, and myths. Through this recognition, humans learned their place in a larger system. They were participants in a living, conscious world where respect and observation ensured survival and belief provided guidance and meaning. Nature, in its majesty and terror, became the first teacher, the first God, and the first mirror in which humans saw both themselves and the universe around them. The legacy of the first beliefs is closer to us than we might imagine. Even 300,000 years later, echoes of those early sparks of faith resonate in our rituals, stories, and sense of wonder. When we light a candle, whisper a prayer, or marvel at the stars, we are participating in a tradition that began in the flickering shadows of prehistoric fires. These first humans, shaped by fear and hope, gave birth to practices and ideas that continue to guide the human spirit. Consider the rituals that surround life and death, burial ceremonies, symbolic offerings, and commemorations of ancestors. These are not inventions of recent civilization. They are ancient gestures, passed down and refined over countless generations. They reflect a fundamental human need to understand, honor, and find meaning in the cycles of existence. Similarly, the way communities gather around shared stories or symbols mirrors the first attempts at cohesion through myth and imagination. Art and symbolism, too, remain part of our experience. From paintings to music, architecture to literature, humans continue to externalize thought, emotion, and reverence in tangible forms. Our earliest ancestors' marks on stones and walls have evolved into complex cultural expressions, but the impulse to make the invisible visible has not changed. Even the concept of mediation between the human and the unseen persists in modern practices, whether in spiritual leadership, therapy, or communal guidance. The shamanic figure may have vanished, but the human desire to connect with something greater, to seek counsel from those attuned to unseen forces, remains universal. Ultimately, these first beliefs remind us that faith is intertwined with survival, creativity, and social cohesion. We carry forward lessons from a distant past. That hope can guide action, that fear can teach awareness, and that imagination can shape reality. The echoes of 300,000 years of human curiosity and reverence are present every time we confront the unknown, every time we reach for understanding, and every time we tell a story that matters. If this journey through humanity's earliest spirituality fascinated you, subscribe for more, like the video, and leave a comment saying, "I feel the fire of the first belief." Don't stop here. Check out our next video on how ancient myths shaped the civilizations that followed.